Family, friends, and others who thought they knew what I did for a living would advise me to stay calm and leave it to the experts. The few people who actually knew what my job was advised me differently. They advised me to be careful and leave no evidence. My handler told me he couldn't make any arrangements and then quickly arranged a plane to get me home as soon as possible. Officially, I was on one of my frequent business trips, this time east of Paris. Partly true if the word east can be stretched 3,000 miles or so to a place much hotter and drier than Paris at this time, or any other time of year for that matter. My contract was successfully and cleanly executed, as I was told, to please our American friends who wanted to make sure that our target would not survive the drone attacks that would follow in order to hide what was really going on. The helicopter arrived just in time, and within minutes of laying down my rifle, I was being whisked away to safety. At least that's what was supposed to happen. But we didn't realize that we were flying low over the heads of a group of foes, and that one of them would react so quickly and shower our transport with a hail of metal. Miraculously, it didn't hit the pilot and me, but it didn't miss something very important in the mechanisms above us. "Prepare for a hard landing," my pilot shouted, which I would have guessed from the grinding sounds coming from above and the way the copter rocked. Then the engine shut down. The sound of metal grinding stopped, soon followed by the loud crunch and clink of broken glass as we hit solid ground. Then came complete silence, which, however, we could not enjoy for very long. We both jumped off our stricken bird and ran for cover, scrambling through the brush and ducking behind a pile of large boulders as if our lives depended on it, which, of course, it did. Jim, the American pilot, whose name was probably not his real name, picked up the light machine gun he had captured, and I, trying to remain calm, opened my leather case and carefully assembled my own weapon, knowing that I had only a very limited supply of special bullets that I had prepared myself only a few days before. My gun, strange in appearance to those outside my business, was custom-made for me, and in my business, if it took me more than 2 shots, I would consider it a failure. We didn't have to wait long. "They know what they're doing," I muttered, as I watched them spread out and move toward us, taking turns pushing off from one of the boulders scattered across the ravine and scooting behind another. Each movement brought them closer to us, but beyond the reach of Jim's gun, but not beyond the reach of mine, as they were about to find out. I didn't have time to line them up as soon as they made their move, so I simply focused the scope on one of the boulders behind which I could see one of them had disappeared, and waited, and waited. Then there was a tap on my shoulder and my rifle rang out. No bullet was wasted. Normally at this distance I prefer to shoot at the head, but this was a moving target and death wasn't necessary, so I chose the center of the body, more concerned with taking the target out than sending it back to its maker. 5 bullets, 5 casualties, and our attackers, quite reasonably, decided to try a different route. The terrain to our right was too steep and open for a flank attack, so as military commanders have done for centuries, they sent a small squad to the left to try to outflank us. Their cover was much better, and I spent 1 bullet trying to beat them off, but then decided to hold my fire and not use up my dwindling ammunition supply. We were left with 2 choices, short of surrendering as prisoners. That was to try to defend on 2 fronts, which was understandably unsatisfactory, or to try to outflank the flanks. So it didn't take a military genius to make that decision. While Jim occasionally fired short bursts down the ravine, more to remind them he was there than with the hope of hitting someone, I gathered my gear, crawled out from behind a boulder, and moved awkwardly away from the scene of the battle, praying that a lucky bullet wouldn't find me. I hoped they would think I was retreating and running away, leaving poor Jim to his fate, not realizing that distance was my only advantage. After running a few hundred yards and being out of range of their guns, I deviated from my course and began to climb, intending to get higher up the slope than the group trying to get above where Jim was. I deliberately did not try to get behind them, not having the time or energy to do so, nor did I have the weapons I had. I finally found a suitable spot and laid down, waiting until my breathing calmed, and then picked up my rifle and took aim where I hoped the baddies would be preparing their next attack. 3 shots and 3 hits, but only 1 round left, and I was left with my small caliber pistol, which in these circumstances might as well have been a pea shooter, and the distance turned from my best friend to my worst nightmare. I wondered what my wife back home, who thought I was in France, would say when I didn't make it home. And then, just in time, a drone appeared. There was a mighty bang, and the sky lit up with light. What had been dropped must have destroyed the camp I had been following for what now seemed like an eternity. It made me wonder if my contribution had even been necessary. Then it was over as abruptly as it had begun, and our adversaries vanished into thin air, only to return to find out what had happened. The rumble of an approaching helicopter was more welcome than ever, and they looked like avenging angels as 3 of them, a large 2-seater and 2 smaller ones, swooped over the hill and down towards us. While the 2 smaller birds stayed up there and made sure no one was in our way, the big boy landed and we both ran towards him. A moment later, we were inside and were sent to safety while one of the gunships blew our helicopter to pieces, not wanting it to fall into enemy hands. The last person I expected to meet when we returned to the American base we were operating from was my superior, Gerald. This was Major General Sir Gerald Blunt, retired, a former Coldstream Guardsman, not my regiment, and now a senior member of a somewhat more secretive department of the British government, and not someone I expected to come to congratulate me, especially as we had mistakenly lost one of the precious American helicopters. "Well done, Tom," was all he had to say on the matter before he started talking about why he was really here. "There was a small incident in your hometown, Tom," he informed me grimly. 2 undesirables got into trouble and took some hostages. "Do you want me to go back there, Sir Gerald?" I asked. "If they're not terrorists, then of course it's a police matter and we shouldn't get involved." "Not usually," he sighed in response. Obviously, something was wrong. "The problem is, Tom, they're holding hostages at the daycare center where your wife works." "Is she okay?" I replied, icy fear gripping my insides. "Did they capture her?" "I'm afraid so, Tom, but she's fine as far as we know," he replied, holding out his hand to keep me from rushing off to do something stupid. Though what exactly, I haven't the faintest idea. "Looks like they shot the school janitor who tried to take them down and are threatening to kill someone else. But things have been quiet for the last few hours." "I've got to get in there," I growled, pushing his hand away. "I know, Tom," he tried to reassure me. "But you realize the department can't get involved in this. It's out of our jurisdiction." "I have to go," I repeated, trying to think of the best way to get home quickly. "Sure, Tom." He smiled almost paternally. "There's an airplane waiting for you outside on the tarmac. Suit up and get in the navigator's chair. The Yanks are grateful for today's work and will gladly provide it." I had broken pretty much every rule, but all I cared about was getting home, and a jet fighter bomber was the fastest way to do it. In no time at all, we landed at Bryce Norton, where a car was waiting for me when I got off the plane, and there were no questions about what was in the leather suitcase I was carrying. After another half hour, I was dropped off in the town square of the market town where we lived. It didn't take long to realize that part of the town was cordoned off by the police and that there was no way I could simply walk to my wife's school. I knew this area of town well, having dropped my wife off and picked her up often during our 5 years of married life. So I didn't need to scout around to realize that the 3-story building across the street was where I had the best chance with my skills to make a difference. But how do I get there? That was quick, the senior police officer who approached me decided. The Army said it would take an hour or more. Follow me. I don't know who he was counting on, but theoretically, I was still a sergeant in the Army, so I just nodded and followed his directions. I soon found myself on the roof terrace of a 3-story building where the cop just nodded and left me alone, probably not wanting to get personally involved in what was about to happen when someone like me got involved. Unlike the guy I found there behind the parapet, who showered me with as much attention as I showered him. It takes one to know the other, and I didn't need to tell him what I had in the briefcase I was carrying, just as he didn't need to tell me what he did for a living. Besides, The M4 sniper rifle lying next to him on the stand was quite the giveaway. "Army?" the man asked. "Didn't expect you to show up so soon." "Yeah," I replied, which was close enough. My transportation was pretty quick. "The police?" I asked again, and he just nodded and turned away to check the building across the street, then looked in my direction as I started to gather my gun again. "Belgian?" he asked. "Special order," I replied. "Heard of them, but never seen one," he commented, and we made sure we both knew what we were doing. "I only have one bullet left," I saw fit to inform him. "There's only two, so that should be enough if we get called in, shouldn't it?" He said this with a humor that was as close to humor as one could ever get. I smiled back, nodded in agreement, and we sat down, keeping our weapons at the ready and aiming our sights at what would soon be our target. "We're on the air," my new partner whispered, answering the call on the portable radio. "What's wrong?" I asked, fearing for the health of my beloved wife. "I have no idea," he replied, "but something has changed and they're nervous. The higher-ups fear they're going to take out someone else, so we're live now. They're both armed and dangerous, and we have to take them both out at the same time, or this could turn into a shootout. They keep coming to the window to check out what's going on outside. I'll take the left window and you take the right." I made the obvious decision. "Are you familiar with standard protocol?" He just nodded, and the two of us lowered our sights, raised our rifles, and ducked into our respective windows, both realizing that both targets were regularly loitering behind them. But we needed them to get to the windows at the same time. "Live, live, 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 live," he called calmly, letting me know he had his sights on one of them, but I didn't see it. And he fell silent as his man moved away, as happened 4 times between us over the next 10 minutes or more. "Live, live, 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 live," I shouted again. Only my years of experience and training allowed me to keep my breathing under control, but this time he replied, "Live!" And the next instant, the crack of our rifles quickly followed each other. His window shattered as a large caliber bullet pierced through it, while my thinner, lighter projectile simply punched a neat hole in the glass. "Target down!" I snarled. "Target hit," he replied, and immediately grabbed his radio to report it to whoever he was working for. "Good shot," my man grinned, gathering his weapon, and I responded in kind, disassembling mine. "Give me 10 minutes," was the last thing he said to me as he got up and walked away, prudently not wanting the two of us with our cases to be seen together by the press, who were no doubt crowding somewhere downstairs. Taking the scope in hand again, I focused again on the school across the street, watching the stream of children and teachers rushing out of the doors to safety, and prayed that my wife would be among them. My prayers were answered, but whatever God it was to whom I prayed, he decided to give me a kick in the teeth. My wife ran out arm in arm with a good-looking guy in whom I recognized Mr. Jones, the high school sportscaster and the same man I had caught making out with her under the mistletoe with over-enthusiasm at their Christmas party a few weeks ago. The same Mr. Jones that had been rumored but that my wife had dismissed with a wave of her hand. The same Mr. Jones who dragged her into the alcove at that very moment and enclosed her in his arms when she'd returned the favor. That could be written off as stress relief, but not the way they'd kissed, and certainly not an excuse for where his hands had wandered. My scope cost the government a tidy sum, but in that moment I wished the resolution wasn't so perfect. Who would want to watch another man put his hand under his wife's skirt as if he were standing next to her? Who would want to be in my shoes at that moment? "What's going on?" The question brought me out of my despair, and looking up, I found another military man clutching a briefcase not unlike my own, but perhaps slightly larger. "You're a little late to the party," I greeted him, picking up my briefcase and saluting as I walked away, leaving him standing still. "Give me 10 minutes. Let them sort it out themselves." Back at our house, safely ensconced in my workshop and waiting for my wife to come home, no doubt at her usual time, though she was clearly not yet in school, I sat and tried to figure out what decisions I needed to make about our immediate future. My workshop is where I retreated to when I needed to be alone and reflect on some of my behaviors that my wife would never be able to understand. Here, I would thoroughly clean and check my rifle and gather the individual ammunition I would need for my next assignment. Usually, my ammunition was for long range and less often for medium range. Rarely did I have to prepare ammunition for short ranges, as was the case at that moment. But I had a tough decision to make before I could consider my work for the day finished. The first bullet I had already assembled lay on the table in front of me. The problem was, would one be enough to satisfy my agony, or should I prepare a second one?